Hello and welcome to the Toy Talks podcast. I am slightly irritated, but before I get into that, I just want to say that I've got some new equipment that I'm testing, and the way I'm testing it is by recording an episode. So you guys have got to let me know if you like the new sound quality of the new equipment, and if you don't, email me, tweet me, let me know how you're feeling. Because if you don't like it, I'm of course going to get rid of it. And I have to get used to the new equipment. I've got a mic right by my mouth. And I'm using my Bose headphones. And it's weird because I just like to be free and talk. And when you have all this equipment, something's likely to go wrong. So that's why I wanted to do a test with an episode to see how you guys are feeling. And then take it from there. So why am I irritated? Well, on Friday, on my way back from work, I was on Snapchat and I was, as usual, recording on Snapchat. And I had shared the fact that I'm quite irritated with the level of aggression as a black woman that I've had to encounter on the train. I've had elbows on my neck. I've had elbows on my rib cage. I've had bad breath on my face, on my nose. I've had all types of encounters, and it's not just that, like, it's the reality of understanding that a lot of these people don't want to see me on the train. I don't want to see black women on the train, because when I shared some of my encounters, and I have done over the last few years, but I definitely have seen a correlation between when certain things are happening in the media. So at the moment, what's dominating the media is Meghan Markle and Harry stepping down from their royal duties. And what you tend to find is whatever is going on in the media, it's reflected in society and the way society interacts with each other. And there's no closer proximity than on a public transport in London. And I think my issue is, I definitely know that the transport system is oversubscribed. We're not arguing about the oversubscription. We're arguing about basic human interaction and basic respect. And I've had stand-up arguments with grown-ass men because they don't understand that when you do something and it's an accident, apologize. You don't listen. It's not assumed that because a train is packed that I must have your elbow on my neck. Do you understand? Just apologize when you know that you have hurt someone, push somebody, just apologize. But it seems that the apology that is owed to black women on the train when something happens is non-existent. And I'm going to go on record to say that I have been jabbed. I haven't been punched. I've been jabbed. I've been pushed to another direction. I thought there was wind. How can there be wind in the tunnel? No, it was a man that decided that his pregnant back, i.e. the fact that he has his backpack, was going to be forcibly used to create more space on the train. It's at a point now where I'm so fed up that I refuse to take bad vibes into the office. It's hard enough waking up in the morning. Like, I'm not a morning person. But then having to have those aggressive interactions because they're aggressive in nature, and then taking that energy to the office, it's exhausting. And then you do a long day at work and all you want to do is come home and you're met with the same aggression. It's a lot. And I have to take responsibility for the bad vibes that then I take into the office and back home because of those negative interactions. So as I was snapping this, and I got home and I was just on Twitter, and then I saw where a young lady had tweeted, and I'm just going to pull up the tweet because I've got my phone in front of me. But basically, she was trying to get on the Central line, and she was standing in front of the door, her and an Asian guy. And from nowhere, a guy that was standing behind her, who happens to be a white male, punched her in her back to forcibly force her on the train so he could get on the train. Where are we where that becomes acceptable? And obviously, because of the era that we're in, she was smart enough to know that she took out her phone and started recording him, took pictures. The man couldn't give any eye contact because he knew what he'd done. The difficulty is obviously the action has already taken place, but there was enough witnesses to see what happened. So let me just call it out. Yeah, she says, "Hi TfL, Metropolitan Police and British Transport Police. This man assaulted me on the Central Line at Mile End by punching me in the back to try and get on the train. People on the train intervened when I confronted him. He got off at Holborn Station at 9:04 a.m. This is him. Please find him. I would like him charged. And she goes on to say, he punched me in my lower back and bum. It's unacceptable, and he thought he could get away with it. Please review the CCTV. So she's had to do this, obviously, because she knows the only way to get this addressed is to tweet it so it can get retweeted. And of course, I retweeted it as well. And she had clear images of the man, and she had witnesses there. But in that type of situation, as a black woman, because I think it's racially motivated, because I can see white women on the train. I don't see him punching them. But take the race element aside for a moment. When I snapped this, and I was just so annoyed, there were so many messages that I received on my Snapchat from black women in the same situation as that woman had been, and empathizing with the fact that, you know, what I was saying on Snap about my interactions on the train. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say only black women get assaulted on the train. But it's only black women that have the same type of story. I don't know every black woman, but why when I share my story, I've got so many black women in the UK empathizing and emphasizing the fact that they have also been through that same situation. I talk about on Snap, you know, you get on the train, and I can speak on my experience where I get on the train and there's 9 times out of 10, there's usually somebody that just has an attitude. And I don't know whether it's because they see me and they're like, so black people go to work. I don't know what that, but it's such a negative type of energy. And I attribute it to my race, because I usually find that I get that type of look. I get that type of aggression from non-black people. And usually it's white people. Sorry, but not sorry. It's the fact. I'm not saying every white person is like that, but I'm saying that my interactions on the train, when it has been negative interactions, it's usually white people. White men, especially white women, are less vocal. They do the looks. They do the looking up and down. They do the, you know, when they look at you and look at them. That is just, and I know it's from an insecurity, and I don't really care for it much, because by the fact that they're not saying anything, that's their problem. When they vocalize it, they make it our problem, and then I'll address it accordingly and have that conversation on the train. And if I have to embarrass them by calling out those microaggressions, I'm prepared to do it. But when it comes to white males, it's the leap to being physically confrontational on the train that I do not understand. It's so bizarre. And I was so angry when I read that tweet, because she must have been shocked, afraid. Her first thing was, I need to record this. I need evidence. And every time she gets on the Central Line, I guarantee you now, she's on a heightened state of alert, because the possibility of being physically assaulted on the train is very real. And I shared that story with my partner, who's a black man. And he said to me, you know what, Toya, that's disgusting. That's terrible. And when I shared with him some of my interactions, he said, you know what? Do you know what the difference is? That couldn't happen to a black man, you know? I was like, what do you mean? He goes, it's very rare that a black man will be assaulted trying to get on a train because somebody else is trying to get on the train. It just wouldn't happen. I said, but that's the point, isn't it? I can't speak from the perspective of a black man, because I don't know how black man's interactions are in the world of work, getting to work, on the train, interact. I don't know. But to know that, to process what you're saying, reiterates the fact that as black women, it's almost like there's this hierarchy, and being black and being a woman, we're at the bottom of the pecking order. I'm telling you now, that's how it is in society. That's what I observe in society. It's what I've experienced in society. And it doesn't change on the train. I'm not sitting here saying all white people. Can you understand what I'm saying here? I'm not saying all. But my experiences have been with white people. Not with Asian people. Black people. And white people, sorry. And it's scary, especially when certain negative things are happening in the media, like the Meghan Markle and Harry, and seeing how the wave of opinion kind of surfaces getting on the train or even work interactions. It's kind of crazy. But I wanted to share that because I was just really, really irritated by it. It really, really upset me that a fellow black woman, that was her encounter. And coincidentally, I was talking about getting on public transport and the aggressions and the microaggressions, only then to read that. So it did reiterate kind of how I was feeling and how I feel every time I get on the train. It is just too much. But a topic that I wanted to cover in this podcast is more about an article that I read. So I had quite a few people on Snapchat send me this particular article. And it's an article by Erika Stallings, and it's dealing with the workplace phenomenon from pet to threat. So I read the article, and I've kind of covered it before on my snaps, and I think I've kind of touched on it on the podcast, but I haven't addressed it in silo, and that's what I want to do today. And I definitely recommend looking at that podcast. So if you type it into Google, Pet to Threat by Erika Stallings, it makes for really, really interesting reading. So I'm just going to give my summary of the article and what I believe pet to threat is. And it's a very real concept. It's not a phenomenon. It's real life. So pet to threat is a phenomenon, but a reality of when a black woman employee are embraced and encouraged by their organisation until they start excelling in their role. And from excelling in that role creates a threat, because the natural progression in a role would be a promotion, because you're excelling, you're doing well, you're hitting your targets, you're hitting your objectives, you're hitting your personal objectives and goals within the role. You're really, really being recognized by members of staff and senior management. And then it breeds growth, because then you're thinking about the next steps, and it's a healthy wanting of a progression. Growth comes in proactivity. Growth comes in learning. But there's a practical growth that should happen in a role, and it should be and or a promotion and or a pay increase. And when you start pushing for that recognition, for a promotion and or a pay increase, that's when, as a black woman, you become a threat. When I read this article, I was at work and I couldn't sit still, because I couldn't have coined it better myself, from pet to threat. And I had to start thinking about myself and my career. And I'm constantly reviewing my career and where I am in my career, making sure that I'm growing and hitting my personal objectives, even more so now that I am a contractor. And I hate comparing the black woman employee as a pet, but for the purposes of this topic, we're going to do that. I definitely have been very much a pet during the course of my career. And one thing about me is I like praise. I like to know I'm doing an amazing job. I like to excel. I compete against myself. I want to be the best. I want to be the subject matter expert. I want to be recognized and respected because I am genuinely very good at my job. So in every role I've been at in the last few years, that's always been part of my objectives. You have to have the likability factor in the world of work. You have to, because that allows you to create relationships. And I've never been opposed to creating relationships at work, but it's the types of relationships and how you create those relationships. And I hope that comes across in a lot of the episodes on this podcast. But for me, it's always been about creating allegiances and alliances. And I've spoken about this in an episode. I don't think the episode's up yet, but when it is, you guys can go and have a listen to that. But I've always been quite strategic in creating those alliances. So the head of legal, the influential people that I work with and interact with as part of my role, I create relationships with. And it's from there that I become a threat, because I make it a point of duty to understand my role better than my managers. Because then you become somewhat indispensable, quote unquote. I don't believe any employee is indispensable, but you know what I'm saying. You almost you're the go-to person. And because you're delivering and you're excelling, the respect comes, because people respect you because you're doing amazing at your role before they respect you as a person. As a black woman, that's what I find. And that's fine. I don't care. As long as the respect comes, I'm not really bothered how it comes. So in a lot of my roles, as I said, I've always been the pet. I've always been the liked one. And it's often created resentment amongst my teams, because a lot of the teams I've worked at are quite small, but I didn't really care, because I knew what my objective was. And my objective has always been to grow in an organisation. But the problem I found, and I don't know if you all have been in those similar situations, and if you have done, make sure you share with me on Twitter, Toya_W, because I want to hear about some of your experiences. When I have pushed for the recognition, and when I say recognition, it's not the feedback that I get from clients and colleagues alike, because I keep those folders. I talked to you guys about keeping a burn folder. You keep a feedback folder as well. It's imperative, because a lot of the feedback you get is if you're doing a really good job, a lot of that feedback is going to be unsolicited. And it's important that you keep that, because that will speak to how well you're doing at work, because I believe that words are just lip service unless they're put on paper. So when I get this recognition, we're looking at next steps. Where do we go from here? But I found that as a black woman, I've reached the ceiling far too quickly. And in one role, I'd reached the ceiling as soon as I started. And the reason I say that is this particular team was a flat structure. And that was to my detriment. Because when you have a team that's a flat structure, and what I mean by flat structure is there's no seniors, everybody's on the same level, but on different pay scales, which is crazy to me. That creates a problem. And in that role, it created a problem for me. I was the senior person in that team. I was the person that if a new person started, my line manager would direct them to me. Toya, could you train them? When it came to a lot of the difficult contracts, I was the one that would negotiate them. Bearing in mind, I had a line manager that had no legal background, legal experience whatsoever. So she really relied on me to really give her some of that contractual legal advice. But when it came to the history of the organisation, history of the contracts, she was the best historian. But for what we do, we don't need a historian. You need somebody who's going to be able to deliver on these contracts. And that's what I did. Now, to her credit, when it came to bonus time, it wasn't a convincing type of a conversation. I got the highest I could possibly get when it came to my bonuses. But then you reach a point in your career where you're like, okay, where do I go from here? Because this organisation, I really loved working there. I really enjoyed. I thought I'd be there for quite a few years. I loved the people. I loved the fact that I knew who to go to get certain information. I loved the fact that people knew who I was because I delivered these contracts that were multi-million-pound contracts or multi-million-dollar contracts. I loved the fact that I had remote teams that relied on my contractual advice. I loved the fact that if I wasn't in the office, everything would be at a standstill because they'll be like, no, we need Toya for this. That respect is what I cultivated. And when I started, I never got any training. No one held my hand. I literally had to walk through the wilderness in that role. And it was tough. And there were times when I questioned my own ability. Can I do this? And I'd finally gotten to a place in this role whereby I was now looking at next steps. You see, the problem with bonuses is bonuses are great from a financial perspective. But on that CV, no one really cares if you got the bonus, darling. They care about what your job title was and what you did in that role. And for me, this role was about growth. I didn't have tech experience before I started here. Suddenly I'd acquired all this tech experience. So it needed to mean something. I say all of this to say, when I had those conversations about growth, I was met with resistance. It was just resistance. And what gave it away was that it was always a flat structure. They never had any intention of having any seniors or heads of within my particular department. They just weren't interested in it. But we were vital to the business. What was very evident in the actual division I worked in is everybody in senior management was white middle class. My line manager was the only female, but she was white middle class as well. So there was no space for me. There was no space. And there's nothing more horrible than feeling like there's no space for you. But as soon as I vocalized my wanting to grow and wanting a more senior role, I became a threat. And once you become a threat, you become an obstacle. And once you're an obstacle, you are a problem. And that is how you go from office pet to office threat very, very quickly. At this point, especially in the role that I was in, I found myself overqualified, doing a role that I didn't really get. Well, I didn't feel like I was getting anything in return. I felt like I was giving my time, I was sacrificing time, I was burning the midnight oil. And, I started to develop unhealthy habits whereby I'd wake up at 6 a.m. to get ready for work. And the first thing I do is reach for my phone. I'll go in the toilet. I'll be on the phone for 20 minutes responding to emails. Work became everything to me. And I felt like, is there something wrong with me that I'm not being recognized via a promotion? Because like I said before, a bonus is just monetary, and bonuses are great. But when you're talking about career progression, that's a different topic. Rewarding somebody by giving them a promotion because they've done really well at their job, they're excelling, surpassing expectation, is the greatest form of reward that exhibits growth that you can get in an organization from my perspective. So when you become a threat, it started to threaten and undermine the position of my manager, because now I was being recognized in my own right. And now I was questioning what it is that I meant, what was my purpose, what is now my objective in a role where I've done everything, I need more. And I definitely felt like there were undertones of racial bias, whereby if I was a white woman, I definitely feel like there would have been more consideration about promoting me. I definitely think that it's less likely to be given a second thought if you represent the common theme amongst senior management, i.e. white middle class. It would have been less of an issue. I wouldn't be seen as a threat. And when you're seen as a threat, the first reaction, especially from an employer, a line manager, is to then make you question yourself. Are you sure you're ready? Are you running before you can walk? We haven't got to a point in the department where we've actually considered senior management within your department, within your department. I think you need to give it a couple of years so you can develop further. There are no senior roles available for you. I think you need to take time to understand the business more. Everything that would have you questioning the right, the want, the need to be in a more senior role. It's almost like they convince you that you're not right, you're not good enough right now. And it's like they give you hope, but they know the hope is not based on anything substantial. They'll just give you hope and hope that you'll quieten down. I definitely started to feel as though the ambition had been beaten out of me in this particular role. I wasn't allowed to be ambitious because ambition didn't fit into the direction of the team. my manager wanted me to be amazing at my role because it made her look good. But she never banked on the fact that making her look good would not be enough for me. Like, why would making you look good be enough for me? Like, okay, great. You know, you recognize my good work through bonuses, but making you look good meant more to you than my own personal development. And in this particular role, I found out also that a male member of staff who had started after me, who I had actually trained, who wasn't necessarily qualified to do the role, but had been given the role anyway. I trained him, and then I found out that he was earning £5,000 a year more than me. And when I found out, I just remember I was shaking with absolute rage. It was rage. And initially, I just wanted to send an email, but I know better than that. And I'm never going to allow the devil to catch me out in the workplace. It's never going to happen. But that was the motivation I needed. That and knowing that there was no more space for me. I was perceived a threat. The ambition had begun to be beaten out of me. I had to accept that this role had a ceiling. I'd reached it, and they wanted me to stay at that ceiling. That's what served them. And then I started to question, what served me? What did the next stage of my career look like? So then I decided that I needed to start looking at other roles. So I was looking at other perm roles. Because, you know, when you move from office pet to office threat, and you do everything possible to try and navigate getting a more senior role, a promotion, there is no time. It's not time sensitive. I think that if somebody reaches a peak in their role at 9 months, like, you are allowed to communicate that. It was over a year now that I'd been working there. And like I said, I started to look at other roles and then questioning, like, whether I was ready for a senior role. I'd always talk myself out of it. And then I'd go into work and I was that gerbil on the wheel going round and round. I was like, no. It's time for me now to do something. And I was working amongst contractors. So, you know, people in the office, you talk. And I remember having a conversation with a few contractors, and they were like, Toya, listen, you can do anything you want to do. You can be a contractor and earn X amount of money per day doing what you're doing now and be recognised on a more senior level. So I updated my CV. Again, I have communicated this on my Toy Talks Instagram page about the need to review your CV on a quarterly basis. And it's not every quarter that you're going to be adding something, but you learn so many skills in an organisation that sometimes you forget it after you've left. So I definitely encourage people to update their CV every quarter. I updated my CV and I cascaded it out to all the agencies within my industry. And I got so much feedback, and the interview process started. I registered my limited company. I got an accountant upon recommendation from a really good friend of mine who was also a contractor. And I secured a contract. Now, the day rate was fantastic for a first contract. And it was an opportunity now for me to sit down and have a conversation with management based on a clear objective. If you don't promote me, I'm going to leave. And I had that conversation, and they didn't take me seriously. And they didn't take me seriously because when they were beating the ambition out of me, they never actually thought that I would leave. I was so ingrained and entrenched into the organisation, the thought of me leaving wasn't something that they had really, really processed. And I will never forget it. It was a Friday. I was working from home. I sent my resignation. Via email. But on the Friday before, I'd had a face-to-face conversation with my manager. And I told her, listen, I'm going to resign and I'm going to serve my notice via email to the head of department and with you on copy and HR. And she said to me, I'm not even going to convince you to stay. And I said, why? She said, because you deserve a senior role and you're never going to get it here. Little did I know that she was planning to resign herself, but that's another story. So on the Friday, I handed in my resignation via email, and within 10 minutes, the head of department sent me a private email saying that he's completely devastated that I was going to leave and all of this. And in my head, I was like, but my line manager has been talking to you about promotion for a long time, so this shouldn't come as a surprise. But this is the thing. I think especially these white, middle-class, male-dominated industries, they generally think that you couldn't possibly want to leave it. Nothing gets better than where they are. I mean, come on. Like, ambition is not just reserved for middle-class white people. Ambition is for anybody who chooses to participate in wanting more for themselves. And he put some time in my diary for Monday for us to meet, 9:00. But what they didn't know is, not only am I a contract manager, like, I read my own contracts, my employment contracts, I negotiate them before I accept any form of employment or any form of contract. And what they hadn't done is amended my notice period in the contract. So my notice period was 4 weeks. But for my level in that organisation, it should have been 3 months. That's not my problem. My job is not to do HR's job for them. Like, I've already spoken to you guys about how useless I consider HR to be. I call them the tea and biscuit brigade, because 3 p.m, tea and biscuit, midday tea and biscuit, 5 p.m, tea, biscuit, home time. Like, I really struggle with HR because I've never met or gone into an organisation that has any form of competent HR. Like, these people, sometimes I struggle with whether they actually read the contracts they send out to potential employees. And in this case, they hadn't read mine properly. And I'd pointed out that my notice period was 4 weeks. So when I went in on Monday, and then I had the conversation with the head of department, and I said to him, listen, you guys must have seen this coming. I want a more senior role. I don't want to leave, but I'm going to have to if it means that I'm going to grow. And I can't stay stagnant in an organisation for 2 years or almost 2 years in the hope that you guys are going to promote me when I know it's not going to happen in a flat structure where there is no seniority in the team. The pay scale's off, and I'm so intrinsic to the business in terms of the department, but you guys are not recognising that. And it's not enough to throw money at me every April. I want more. So he was like, well, as you know, so the head of department was a man, and I've actually spoken to you guys about him before in a previous episode of the podcast. But for the purposes of this, we're going to call the head of department Michael. So Michael said to me very confidently, he was like, well, Toya, it's so sad to see you go. You know, the department loves you a lot. They really, really respect. You're really, really respected. You've really negotiated some really, really high value contract that's really gotten the attention of the board. You see, flattery, trying to flatter me into changing my mind. I was just sitting there looking at him, and he said to me, I'm going to give you some time to think about this. And in my head, I'm thinking, so basically you think that I'm just throwing my toys out the pram and you think I need to think about it. No, you've had time to think about this. I've given you the opportunity to recognize what I bring to the table, and you've chosen not to. I don't need time to think about it. And I said to him, Michael, I don't need time to think about something that I've been thinking about for the last year. Because in the last year I've been thinking about it. I've been communicating with you and my line manager, and you guys have time and time again basically told me there is no growth in this team. And for somebody who has goals and aspirations, it doesn't work for me. So in this case, I don't need the time. I am terminating my contract as per the notice period in my contract. I'm providing you with 4 weeks notice. And he was like, well, we have to manage the comms and how we tell the team. He was more worried about image and reputation. Anyway, fast forward, I left. I started the contract. I was contracting in a public sector organisation, and I really didn't like it there. It was just public sector and me don't get on anyway. I think public sector, some public sector organisations are very much lazy. They're not there to generate a profit. They're using the taxpayers' money and reinvesting that money. It's not about making a profit for them. Therefore, you don't necessarily have a lot of autonomy in terms of what you can and can't do. Whereas with the private sector, I found that it afforded me the opportunity to use a lot of my autonomy. It's about making profits. So private sector are more likely to want to take risks. And that is me. You know, in terms of what I do for a living, private sector suits me more. And I'd heard from the grapevine, I was in that contract for about a month, and I'd heard from the grapevine that the organisation that I had left was struggling to find a replacement for me. And my previous line manager had resigned, so it was up in arms. And I saw an opportunity. I contacted my line manager and I said, hi. She said, hi, Toya, how are you? I said, listen, I heard that you guys are struggling to find a replacement for me since I left. I've set up my limited company and I can come back as long as you pay the day rate that you advertised for a contractor had come in to temporarily take over from me. I know that you haven't filled that role, but what you advertised as a day rate, I would like you to offer that to me. And you won't have to train me because obviously I know the job inside out, and I can help you recruit for my replacement if you'd like. But also I will be the bridge between carrying on with BAU and a lot of project stuff until you can find somebody to replace me on a perm basis. My previous line manager laughed and she said, you know, Toy, if it was up to me, it would be a yes. Then she contacted, and she said she'll come back to me. So she contacted the head of department, and he basically jumped at the chance. They tried to negotiate the day rate down, and she had told him, listen, Toy's already seen what it's advertised for. She's worth more than that money anyway. Like, it's non-negotiable. Long story short, I ended up returning to the organisation where I was a perm. But this time I was coming back as a contractor, and they were paying an astronomical day rate for me and my services. Do you know the biggest lesson I learned from that? So this organisation, rather than promote me, which would have been a lot more cheaper than me leaving and them having to get a contractor in to replace me, but they would rather cut their nose to spite their face. And then I ended up going back as a contractor, charging maybe 10 times more in a day rate, and they were paying for that. And I concluded from that, organisations don't owe you anything. And you have to, when you've exhausted all avenues of recognition and getting a promotion, an option for you has to be to seek pastures new. Because you run the risk of having your ambition beaten out of you. You run the risk of questioning yourself, lacking in confidence, and feeling like you should be grateful with crumbs. How can I have been grateful with crumbs? They knew that I was ambitious, but that ambition served them so long as I stayed within the box in which they had created for me. And I reached the ceiling very quickly. And, I'm going to be honest here. They didn't know that I would reach that ceiling as quickly as I did. But there was still a ceiling because it was a flat structure. Then I leave, come back as a contractor, and then you pay a day rate. Are you kidding me? And you know when I really knew that white privilege is honestly alive and kicking? I always knew it anyway. I found out when I was contracting there, so when I went back as a contractor, I found out that the head of department had announced that I was returning as a contractor and lied to them and told them in a team meeting that I wasn't going to come back on a day rate that was advertised. I'd be returning back on the equivalent day rate of what I would have earned had I been a perm, which was a lie, because that would have been significantly less. So I get what he was doing. He just didn't want anybody to think that they can do the same thing, leave and come back as a contractor. But he lied to them, and maybe he thought I wouldn't know. And I was just, in my head, I was like, we have a contract in place for my services, and part of that contract says that we would not discuss day rate. But this man made sure that he went over and beyond to tell people, no, she's coming back on the equivalent of what she would have earned as a perm, as a day rate. So basically, I'm coming back for the same money. It's only a fool that would believe in it. Organizations have money, you know. Don't let them try to convince you that they don't. If an organization really, really wants you, they will fight to keep you. And don't get me wrong, when I resigned initially when I was a perm, they did try and keep me. They did try and fight to keep me. And I was very honest about what I wanted, but they just wouldn't prepare to give it to me. They wasn't. So they ended up paying 10 times more for me to come back as a contract. It's crazy. And even till now, I'm doing this episode, it's still a flat structure in that organisation, in that particular team. They haven't learnt from it, and they haven't learnt from it because they know that they can find somebody else to fill the role eventually. They would so they would rather stunt my growth than to promote me. That's crazy to me. That is so crazy. The theory of office pet to office threat is a reality for a lot of people who are in organisations where they are excelling. There are some organisations that encourage growth, but you have to jump through so many hoops. And when you weigh it up, it's not worth it. But you have to be very, very real with yourself, because one thing about the theory, what is a theory to others, but is a reality for us as Black women, the office pet, office threat works against you when they consider you a threat. It starts to work against you because you start meeting resistance in places that you never did before. You start becoming comfortable in a place that you felt quite comfortable. And it's really easy to work in an organization and become really, really comfortable, or be forced to be comfortable because the idea of being a threat is too much. Some people are happy just going to work and earning their money and getting recognition through bonuses. And there's nothing wrong with that. And I encourage you guys not to, look down your nose at people who are like that. But for people who want more, I think it's important that you accept that your more is their uncomfortable. Your growth is highlighting their inability and their incompetence as managers and senior management. Your goals are justified when you want to succeed in your career. And sometimes success is not necessarily where you are, it's where you're going to go. And what I learned from the perm role that I was in, that I eventually left to go contracting, is it was a launch pad for me. It's kind of what I needed. I needed to move from office pet to office threat to encourage me and to push me to look outside and look elsewhere and not confine my ambitions to an organization that wasn't ambitious enough for me. I will encourage people to take the time to see what your organization competitors are offering. I know a lot of people that have moved from one organization to another who happen to be a competitor. Don't allow yourself to be subdued by the fact that organizations are happy to keep you where you are. What you'll find is staying where you are is okay for the meantime, and for a time in which suits them, but you'll get to a point where you get bored. And I definitely feel in that last organization I got bored. Like, I knew the role inside out, and I had to be honest, the last 6 months of that role I wasn't really learning. And when you're not learning, you're not growing. And if you're not growing, you're standing still. And when you're standing still, there is nothing. There is no growth. There's no prospects when you just stand still. I really hope that I've taken the time to explain from office pet to office threat and offered you some solutions to being in that situation and being in situations like that. It's very uncomfortable being ambitious in an organization that doesn't want you to be. But you have to make sure an organization works to serve your purposes. When you go into an organization, what is your objective? What are you trying to get out of this organization? Is it experience? Is it additional learning? You'd like them to pay for, courses and things like that? Is it that it will just look good on your CV? When an organization serves its purpose, don't wait to be a threat before you decide that actually you want to look elsewhere. And if you are made an office threat, don't be afraid to look outside and see what you could get, going to interviews and making sure that you are getting into the flow of those interviews. And what happens is when you're interviewing, you're increasing in confidence, especially when your confidence has been dumbed down or your confidence has been attacked in your role. And when you are offered something, if you know that you still want to stay, it's important to have those honest conversations, because you have the leverage. The leverage is that offer that you have been made by an external organization. And it comes with risks as well, because maybe they haven't seen that you're a threat up until the point in which you then turn to them and say, hey, I've been offered another role. And what happens, and has happened in some cases that I've heard of, is when they have, told organizations, listen, I've been offered a role, and then they counter offer, they pigeonhole you as a threat anyway. So I definitely think it's a balancing act. And I definitely think that you need to have clear goals and objectives whenever you join an organization, or if you've been somewhere for too long. Have a conversation with yourself and say, am I still learning here? What do I need from this organization? Are they willing to give me this? If they're not, what is going to be my next steps? So I hope that you have enjoyed this episode, from office pet to office threat. This is the Toya Talks podcast, and my name is, of course, Toya Washington. Let's keep the conversation going. My hashtag is Toya Talks. My Twitter handle is Toya, Toya_W, and my personal Instagram page is Toya_Washington, and the Toya Talks Instagram page, can you guess it? It's Toya_Talks. I have really enjoyed delivering this episode to you. I hope you guys have enjoyed receiving it. If you want to send me an email, if you just want advice, or you want to share something with me that's happening at work and you want us to discuss it here on the podcast, please email Toya, Toya.talks, INC, @gmail.com. Thank you so much and have a great day.